She didn't know where she was, and since she was only 6 years old, she didn't stop and look around or yell. Instead, she just kept walking in this direction that she didn't recognize. When they turned, she wasn't there. And so the grandparents immediately run back up, and they're looking around for Haley, thinking she probably darted behind a tree to hide. And so they're kind of looking for her. They're not that worried yet. They start yelling for her, saying, "You gotta come out, we gotta go." But there was no word from Haley. It was just silence, and she was just totally gone. And for the next 90 minutes, the grandparents just ran all up and down this trail screaming for Haley, and they never found her. And so they ran down and they called police. The largest search and rescue mission in the history of Arkansas was launched for Haley Zega. But after 2 days, despite this incredible search, really no progress had been made. The only thing that had been found was one of the dog teams had tracked her scent up to a nearby road where the dog stopped, meaning the scent is now gone. And unfortunately, what that told investigators is it looks like Haley got picked up by some motorist. But 51 hours into the ordeal, there were two searchers well outside of the primary search area. They were about 2 miles away from where she'd gone missing. They spotted her. She was sitting next to this brook with her feet dangling in the water. And when she saw them, she kind of waved and they said, "Are you Haley Zega?" And she said, "Yeah." And she had a couple of scratches on her arm and on her face, but overall she seemed okay. And so Haley was reunited with her family, and then she was brought to the hospital to be observed. After Haley had regained some of her strength, investigators asked her, what happened? And she said that she was walking behind her grandparents and that she looked down. And then when she looked up again, not only were her grandparents gone, but she was looking at this wall of trees. Like she was not on the trail anymore. She didn't know where she was. And since she was only 6 years old, she didn't stop and look around or yell. Instead, she just kept walking in this direction that she didn't recognize. And she walked and walked and walked, and she never found the trail again. She said pretty soon it got dark and she slept on top of that bluff. And then the next day when the sun came up, she walked down the bluff and she made it to the river. And then she walked along the river until she found a cave where she slept for the second night. And then the next day when she got up, she was found. After she gave this explanation, investigators had a lot of questions. Like, if you were sleeping up on the bluff on that first night, then why couldn't the helicopter see you? Because that's all they were doing, was flying over the bluff, and they had thermal imaging. They could have very easily picked you up. And so they asked her, are you sure that's where you were? And she said, yeah, that's where Alicia told me to stay. And they were like, who's Alicia? And she said, oh, she's my imaginary friend. I met her on the bluff. And so immediately the investigators and the parents are like, okay, she's clearly coping with this traumatic event by creating this imaginary friend. And so they don't ask any more questions about the imaginary friend. Instead, they continue to ask questions about basically how she got from where she was lost to where she was found. And they say, okay, Haley, how did you get down the bluffs? Because there's only one way down and it can be hard to find, especially if you're off the trail. And Haley said, well, Alicia brought me to a trail and she led me down the bluffs, and she stood in front of me and made sure that I didn't fall forward. And so her parents and the investigators are now starting to think, maybe this isn't an imaginary friend if this person is right in front of her kind of propping her up. And so they ask Haley, can you describe what Alicia looks like? And Haley said, sure. She has black hair, brown eyes. She's a little bit shorter than me. She's 4 years old. She likes to tell jokes and she likes to sing songs. And then Haley began singing songs that she had learned from Alicia and began telling jokes she had learned from Alicia. Even though Haley was giving this vivid description of this 4-year-old girl named Alicia running around the bluffs, it just couldn't be possible. And so Haley's parents and the investigators went back to treating Alicia as just an imaginary friend, just a simple coping mechanism. And so the investigators went back to just doing their interview with Haley. They got all the information about how she got from the bluffs down to the river as much as they could. And then because Haley was fine, they said, okay, you're good. See you later. Now, Haley's case was a really big deal and it was all over the news, especially after she was found. And so her interview where she said this imaginary friend named Alicia had assisted her in getting down the bluffs and had basically taken care of her, that was put in print. And after it was published, there were some readers that realized there was another little girl who had gone missing in the exact same spot as Haley 23 years earlier. She was 4 years old. She had black hair, brown eyes. Her name was Alana, and she had died on those bluffs. After this connection was made, it got national media attention because suddenly news outlets were saying this imaginary friend was actually Alana and that she was Haley's guardian angel. In fact, Haley was brought on Dateline to talk about her imaginary friend. Haley, who's now 25 years old, posted a video to her YouTube channel where she tells her story of what happened over those 51 hours she was gone. And in the story, she talks about her imaginary friend. And she says, before Alicia, I never had an imaginary friend. And Afterwards, I never had an imaginary friend. But at the time, Alicia was very real to me, and I don't know who or what she was, but she saved my life.